The governor has declared this week Community Risk Reduction Week. The Fire Marshal's Office, the Maine Forest Service, and more met in Augusta today to discuss risk reduction efforts throughout the state. The Community Risk Reduction Program has the mission of identifying, prioritizing, and mitigating risks by addressing issues like car accidents, fires, and medical emergencies. The goal is to reduce fatalities, property losses, and costs of medical responses. The new effort is supported by the Community Risk Reduction Collaborative, which is made up of members from various state departments and agencies across Maine.
I think the collaborative, when we come together and we start to talk about this, all of it's awareness. You know, that's the very beginning of any program would be what are the problems that we're facing and how do we make people at the lowest level aware of those problems so that they can self-correct those issues.
Right, we want to make the community safe enough where we don't have to go to fire. I would tell cops how you win a fight is not have a fight at all. Right, de-escalate that in advance. Use your smoke detectors. Let's be mindful of that.
Maine already has several successful risk reduction programs in place, including community paramedicine programs, connecting EMS with seniors to reduce hazards in the home, and wildfire risk assessments for homeowners in forested areas.